Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into a seriously eye-opening explainer based on a recent report from the Consumer Policy Research Center. They've essentially mapped out the complete nightmare consumers face when they end up buying a faulty used car in Victoria. We're going to break down the hard data, the very real human cost, and most importantly, the solutions to fix a severely broken system. So let's dive right into this. 75%. If you've ever had a sneaking suspicion that buying a used car is a massive gamble, well, this data point completely validates it. An incredible 75% of people who bought a used car from a dealer ended up having a problem with it. I mean, think about that for a second. That's 3 out of every 4 buyers driving off the lot only to realize they've just bought themselves a massive headache. It's an absolute jump scare of a statistic, right? And it really sets the stage for what we're looking at today. And, that headache usually starts exactly like you'd expect. You're pulled over on the side of the highway, the hood's up, and you are totally stranded. Now, here's where it gets wild. The CPRC found that 36% of these faults are discovered within just the first 3 months of ownership. Over a third? So we're not talking about normal wear and tear after years of driving. These are cars failing right out of the gate, which strongly suggests the dealers really should have known about these faults before making the sale. This right here is where the life cycle of a lemon truly begins. Once that breakdown happens, reality hits fast. You've got to get the car off the road. Suddenly, you're urgently relying on a 24/7 towing service. It is a highly stressful, logistical nightmare. The car has to be strapped onto the back of a truck, and for a lot of people, this is the very first unexpected out-of-pocket expense in what is going to become a ridiculously long journey. Because there's this really fascinating contrast going on. Think about your local Victorian responders. Companies like Elite 24/7 Towing, Highton, or Geelong Accident Towing, they promise incredibly fast physical rescues. We're talking round-the-clock emergency responses, showing up in 30 minutes or less. They literally clear the road hazard instantly. But contrast that 30-minute physical rescue with the agonizing months-long and sometimes even years-long legal standstill consumers are about to face just to get their money back. The physical problem? Solved in minutes. The legal problem? Yeah, that's just getting started. And the crucial point here is that the financial barrier starts on day one. According to the CPRC's data, over a third of consumers, 35% to be exact, actually struggled with the upfront costs of towing the car just to get it to an expert mechanic. And keep in mind, you absolutely need that expert mechanic's evaluation to prove the car is faulty and even start your complaint. But if you can't even afford to tow a 1.5-ton metal box to the shop, your pursuit of justice is pretty much stalled before it begins. Now, let's say you do manage to get that evidence. You are then forced to navigate what can only be described as a complete maze. Resolving a dispute in Victoria generally means going through VCAT, the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. The CPRC actually mapped this process out, and get this, it involves over 60 individual steps. You have to discover the fault, seek advice, formally complain, gather expensive expert evidence, apply to the tribunal, attend hearings, and then finally hope you get an order. It's this highly legalistic, incredibly rigid system that honestly feels built entirely for lawyers rather than everyday people who just want a working car. There's a quote from a survey respondent in the report that really hits the nail on the head. They said, "Unless you're very wealthy, you don't have redress without spending money on a lawyer, independent advice." Wow, it just perfectly humanizes the systemic imbalance we're talking about here. The current consumer protection framework pretty much abandons everyday buyers. It places the entire burden of proof, the massive time commitment, and all those upfront costs directly onto the consumer's shoulders, while putting virtually zero immediate pressure on the dealership. And this brilliantly illustrates the financial toll, which is, frankly, staggering. Of the people dealing with these faulty cars, 59% ended up spending over $1,000 trying to resolve the problem out of pocket. But even more shocking, nearly a quarter, 24%, spent over $10,000. Let that sink in. This is money spent just trying to fix a car or resolve a dispute over a vehicle they have already paid for. The system is just prohibitively expensive to navigate. But, we really have to remember that behind all these dry statistics and complex flowcharts are real people. The CPRC partnered with the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service and the Consumer Action Law Centre for this report, and they really highlighted this severe, disproportionate impact this broken system has, particularly on First Nations people. For a lot of buyers, a broken-down car isn't just some temporary inconvenience to brush off. It actively exacerbates intersecting, really complex life challenges that can quickly spiral totally out of control. To really ground this abstract data, let's look at Christy's story, which is just heartbreaking. Christy is an Aboriginal woman, a single mother of four, and an NDIS participant. She bought a $10,000 car, which was actually funded by a family violence support service, just to secure some safe transport. But within a single month, the engine completely failed on the freeway. And making it even worse, the dealers hadn't even transferred the car into her name, and then they actually surrendered their license to trade. Because of this one faulty car, Christy lost her job as a support worker, her family's situation became unsafe, and it ultimately resulted in her children being displaced to foster care. It's devastating. Then we have Xavier's story, which really exposes the sheer absurdity of the legal side of things. Xavier bought a used car for $14,000, but the dealer tacked on an extended warranty and structured the financing so poorly that his total loan ballooned to $28 grand. 3 months later, the engine needed a complete replacement. It took an agonizing 20 months of legal battling through VCAT to get a resolution. And here is the wildest part. It cost a community legal center approximately $33,000 in legal fees and expert reports just to resolve a dispute over a $14,000 car. The math literally does not make sense. Now, you might be thinking, well, if a dealer finally agrees to fix the problem, at least the system worked, right? Wrong. The data shows this incredibly infuriating reality. 54% of the time a dealer supposedly fixes a car, the exact same issue or sometimes a brand new issue pops right back up. So there is this staggeringly low immediate compliance with the Australian consumer law. Dealers are basically given multiple chances to slap a Band-Aid on these cars, which just leaves consumers trapped in this endless cycle of breakdowns. Okay, so what does this all mean? Where do we actually go from here? It sounds pretty grim, I know, but let's pivot and look at the light at the end of the tunnel. The Consumer Policy Research Center hasn't just pointed out all the massive flaws, they've actually put together a really empowering, clear 3-step reform package. This is a practical roadmap for both state and federal governments to finally fix the underlying mechanics of this broken marketplace. Step 1 is all about making complaints accessible and fair. The real game changer they're proposing here is completely ditching that 60-step VCAT maze we talked about earlier. Instead, the CPRC wants a free, fair, and independent ombuds scheme. Think about it. You have an ombudsman for your internet or your electricity, right? Well, we desperately need one for cars. And the best part? They propose this should be funded by the automotive industry itself, which is brilliant because it means the exact businesses generating the most complaints would be the ones paying the most to fund the resolution process. Step 2 focuses on resolving these faults much sooner. This means seriously strengthening dealer licensing obligations. If a dealer sells you a lemon, they need to be held accountable. The CPRC suggests forcing dealers to cover those initial towing costs we discussed, which immediately removes that huge financial roadblock for the buyer. They also want regulators to step in and ban restrictive non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs. Right now, dodgy dealers are actually using these NDAs to gag consumers and stop them from warning others about unsafe, faulty cars. And then we have the final step, step 3, actually stopping the sale of faulty cars in the first place. Believe it or not, right now, courts can force a company to offer a refund, but they can't actually penalize them for selling a total dud under the consumer guarantees. The CPRC is calling for major amendments to the Australian consumer law. They want regulators like the ACC to have the power to slap severe financial penalties on dealers who repeatedly breach these guarantees. If you hit them in the wallet, you better believe the quality of the cars on the lot will miraculously improve overnight. Which brings us to our final thought for today. Who should really be bearing the cost of this broken system? Because right now, it's everyday people, single mothers, regional workers, First Nations communities who are paying the ultimate price. They're losing jobs, racking up massive legal fees, and dealing with unbelievable stress, all while predatory dealers face pretty much zero consequences. The CPRC's report really challenges us to rethink our consumer rights entirely. It is abundantly clear that the burden needs to shift away from the buyer and back to the seller, where it belongs. I highly recommend you check out this report for yourself and start advocating for a fairer marketplace. Thank you so much for joining me today for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.